I overheard my dad say to my sister, "Your sister? She doesn't deserve a dime, she's crossed out." I looked at my mom, but she just smiled, like it was normal for her. I didn't say anything back. I just got up and walked out. That same night, I transferred all my money so it would never fall into their hands. My father's birthday was always a special occasion in our family. Every year, on June 28th, we gathered at my parents' house for dinner, which my mother prepared with special care. This day, when my father turned 62, was no exception. I arrived early to help with the preparations. Mom was fussing in the kitchen, arranging the gold-rimmed china plates, our ceremonial set, which was only taken out of the cupboard on special occasions. "Carrie, dear, you'd better change." Mom looked critically at my strict pantsuit. "You should wear that blue dress I gave you for Christmas." I suppressed a sigh. At 32, I still hadn't learned to ignore my mom's comments about my appearance. "Mom, I'm straight from work. Besides, this dress is too dressy for a family dinner." "You're always making excuses." Mom shook her head. "Allison, by the way, always looks impeccable." "Oh, yes. Allison is my younger sister, the epitome of perfection in our parents' eyes. At 26, she was already working at a prestigious marketing company, dating an up-and-coming lawyer, and never forgetting to wear that blue dress to family gatherings. I remained silent, as I had done for years, and continued chopping vegetables for the salad. A social worker with 8 years' experience was not a profession that impressed my father, owner of Whitmore and Sons, a chain of small hardware stores. Ironic, considering he only had daughters. By 6 p.m., guests began to gather. Allison and her flawless Brad arrived, Uncle Harvey and Aunt Marge, a few of Dad's closest friends. And of course, Raymond Whitmore, my father, a tall man with gray hair and a commanding gaze that always made me instinctively arch my back. Dinner went on as usual, the clinking of glasses, muffled conversations, laughter at my father's stories. I sat between Uncle Harvey and Brad, smiling politely and answering questions about work that no one seemed really interested in. "How are your troubled teens, Carrie?" Uncle Harvey asked, cutting off a piece of steak. "Still trying to save the world on the government payroll?" "They're not my troubled teens." I tried to keep my voice casual. "And yes, the work is going well. Last week, one of my charges went to college, the first in her family." "That's commendable," my uncle nodded absent-mindedly, already losing interest. "What about your personal life? You're 32 now, you know." I felt myself blushing. My last serious romance had ended 2 years ago, when Ethan had offered to move to Seattle for a new job, and I couldn't leave my parents and the family business I'd invested all my free time in. "Uncle Harvey, I think Carrie can handle her own personal life," Allison interjected, winking at me across the table. This rare moment of sisterly solidarity eased the tension inside a little. After dinner, Dad suggested we go into the living room for coffee and dessert. I volunteered to help Mom with the dishes and lingered in the kitchen. As I carried the tray of coffee cups, I heard voices coming from my father's study, the door of which was ajar. I instinctively slowed my step. Dad, I wanted to talk to you about the stores." Allison's voice sounded unaccustomedly serious. "You're still planning on expanding next quarter, right?" "Of course, baby. Already looked at a space in Green Hills." My father's voice was full of an enthusiasm I rarely heard when he spoke to me. "Someday it'll all be yours." I froze, afraid to move. 5 years ago, when Dad had suffered a heart attack, Allison and I had agreed that the family business would pass to both of us. I even turned down a promotion so I could spend more time working in the stores on weekends. "What about Carrie?" Allison asked. "I thought we said that. Your sister?" Her father interrupted her, his voice suddenly cold. "She doesn't deserve a dime. She's out." The cups on the tray trembled in my hands. I couldn't believe my ears. "But Dad," Allison began, "Carrie has worked so hard in the stores. She put her life savings into renovating the North Branch last year." "Listen to me, Allison. Your sister has never understood business. She thinks with her heart, not her head. All that charity work she does, all those troubled teens. I didn't build this business to fall apart in the wrong hands. You're gonna have to do this on your own. I felt my throat constrict and my eyes fill with tears. But the hardest blow was ahead of me. "Carrie's going to get married soon anyway and forget about the stores," came the voice of my mom, who appeared to be in the study as well. I saw her smile, like it was the most natural thing to do. "Mom's right," Dad continued. "She should find a good husband instead of wasting her time with her troubled children and our stores. I've already prepared the documents. We'll go to the notary after the holidays." I stood paralyzed, unable to move. For 27 years, I'd been trying to win my father's approval. I'd turned down an internship in New York to help with the family business, invested almost all of my savings in new equipment for the store. And all the while, I've been cut out. "Who are you talking to, dear?" came Aunt Marge's voice from the living room. I quickly pulled myself together and, taking a deep breath, walked into the living room with the tray, smiling as if I hadn't heard the conversation that had turned my life upside down. The next hour passed like a blur. I smiled, kept the conversation going, even helped my father blow out the candles on the cake. But something inside of me finally broke. Or maybe it was the other way around. Something woke up. When it was time to say goodbye, I hugged my father, feeling strangely detached. "Thanks for tonight, Dad. Happy birthday!" My voice sounded steady, even though I was seething inside. "Thank you for coming, sweetheart," he replied, with the same fatherly smile I'd treasured all my life. It seemed fake now. "I'll call you tomorrow," Mom said, kissing my cheek. "Why don't we go shopping this weekend?" "Sure, Mom," I lied, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. At home, I couldn't sleep. My father's words echoed over and over in my head. "She doesn't deserve a dime. She's crossed off." How long had they thought that? How many years had I fooled myself into believing that my loyalty to my family meant something? At 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and turned on my computer. I thought of the money I'd invested in the family business, almost $45,000 saved up over the years. Money my father had promised to pay back when the business got back on its feet. My hands shook as I logged into my bank account. I created a new account at another bank and transferred all of my remaining savings, about $28,000, into it. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start a new life, a life in which I would no longer be crossed off. When the transfer was complete, I felt a strange relief. It was as if the heavy chains that had bound me for years began to loosen. It was a small act of defiance, but to me, it meant something more, the first step toward freedom. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. The city lights twinkled at night, promising new possibilities. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe fully. Tomorrow would be a new day, and my life would never be the same again. The morning after my father's birthday, my eyes were swollen with tears. Transferring the money to a new account brought a strange relief, but it didn't take away the pain. As I lay in bed, I involuntarily started going through my memories, putting together the mosaic of my life, trying to figure out when I became the crossed-out daughter. My childhood was filled with striving to earn parental love. Great grades, help around the house, no behavior problems. I was a model child. And yet, every time I brought home another letter of commendation, my father would only nod discreetly. "Good job, Carrie." That's the way it should be. When I turned 12, Allison was born. I remember the first time I saw her in the hospital, a tiny little bundle of dark hair. Her father held her in his arms, with a tenderness I'd never seen before. "Look, Carrie," he said then, "this is your little sister. You must always take care of her." And I did, changing diapers, reading stories, teaching her how to tie her shoelaces. Allison grew up a bright and sociable girl, quickly becoming the favorite not only of her parents, but also of all the neighbors. "Your sister has a spark," her mother often said as she watched Allison charm the guests at family dinners. "She'd go far." I didn't envy my sister. I loved her. But gradually, roles were formed between us. Allison was the bright star. I was the reliable background. When it was time to go to college, I got a scholarship to New York University. I dreamed of studying social psychology. I remember holding my acceptance letter with trembling hands, imagining a new life away from home. But that summer, my father had business problems. One of his key suppliers canceled his contract, leaving Whitmore and Sons in a difficult position. "We need to tighten our belts," Dad announced over dinner. "I'm afraid, Carrie, your dear New York will have to be postponed." "But my scholarship," I began. "The scholarship won't cover all the expenses," Dad said. "Besides, you're needed here at the store. Family comes first, don't you agree?" Of course I agreed. I went to community college, combined my studies with my job at my dad's store. I came home every night exhausted, but proud. I was helping my family. 3 years later, when the business was back on track, I started talking about moving to New York again. "Now is not the time." My father shook his head. "Mom has health problems." Indeed, Mom was diagnosed with a benign tumor. It required surgery expensive, but not an emergency. I did not hesitate to give my savings, $10,000 saved up during the time of part-time work. "You're a real pillar of the family," my father said, hugging me for the first time. I've kept that moment in my memory for years, as proof that all the sacrifices were not in vain. When Allison enrolled in a prestigious private university, no one talked about belt tightening. Her father proudly paid her tuition, bought her a new car. "An investment in the future," he explained. By the age of 25, I had finally come to terms with my place in the family. I worked as a social worker, helped out at my father's stores on weekends, and continued to be a good daughter. And then Ethan came along. We met at a charity marathon, tall, with kind eyes and an infectious laugh. He immediately caught my eye. On the first date, Ethan told me that he works as an environmental engineer, dreams of his own house on the outskirts of the city and a big dog. "What are your dreams, Carrie?" he asked. And I was confused. No one had ever been interested in my dreams. With Ethan, I slowly started to change. I learned to say no when my dad asked me to work on the weekends. I smiled more, bought bright clothes instead of the usual gray suits. "You're different," my mom once remarked. "That guy is a bad influence on you." My parents didn't like Ethan from the first time they met. My dad wrinkled his nose when he listened to him talk about protecting the environment. Mom criticized the way he dressed. Even Allison, usually friendly with everyone, was aloof. "He's not for you, Carrie," Dad said after dinner. "Too idealistic. People like that don't know how to make money." But for the first time in my life, I didn't listen. My relationship with Ethan grew, and a year later, he proposed. I remember that evening, dinner by candlelight, a ring with a small sapphire. Ethan knew that I prefer modesty to diamonds. "You're making a mistake," Mom kept telling me when I showed her the ring. "It won't give you stability." "I don't need stability, Mom. I need love." I thought I'd finally found my voice. Ethan and I started planning the wedding, looking at houses, and then came the job offer in Seattle. A large environmental organization offered Ethan his dream position. "Come with me, Carrie." Ethan's eyes shone with enthusiasm. "Let's start a new life together." I wanted to say yes. Every cell in my body was screaming yes. But then I pictured my parents without my help. My father shaking his head in disappointment. My mother accusing me of betrayal. "I can't, Ethan." My voice shook. "My family. They need me." "What about us?" he asked quietly. "Don't we deserve a chance?" In the weeks that followed, we tried to find a compromise. A long-distance relationship, Ethan's transfer to the local branch. But a crack had already appeared. And when my father suffered a heart attack, the decision came naturally. "I'm sorry," I said, handing the ring back. "I can't leave them now." Ethan looked at me with sadness and understanding. "I hope someday you realize that you deserve happiness too, Carrie." After he left, I doubled down on caring for my family, spent nights at the hospital with my father, took over the northern branch of the store. I invested almost all my savings in renovating the premises, believing my father's promise that it was an investment in our future together. And now, years later, I've discovered that I was always just a temporary solution, a backup. She doesn't deserve a dime, she's crossed off. Morning came unbidden. I got out of bed, feeling strangely light. I walked to the mirror. A tired woman with reddened eyes stared back at me, but there was something new in those eyes. Determination. I pulled out my phone, intending to turn it off, but saw 10 missed calls from my mom and a message from Allison. "Where are you?" Mom's worried. Before, I would have called back immediately, apologized, reassured her. But today, I just put the phone back on the nightstand. Let them worry. Maybe for the first time in their lives, they'd wonder how I felt. As I brewed my coffee, I sat by the window and let myself face the bitter truth. I'd been fooling myself for years into believing in my family's unconditional love. All that time, I'd been nothing more than a convenient tool, used when I needed it and ignored when I didn't. It took me 32 years and an overheard conversation to finally see reality. But now, I saw it crystal clear. The week after my father's birthday passed like a blur. I hadn't returned my parents' calls, sending only a quick text to say I needed time. I took a few days off work, citing a family emergency. My boss, Robert, who knew me as a workaholic who never took a sick day, only nodded concernedly. "Everything okay, Carrie? You look exhausted." "It's just family problems," I replied, avoiding his gaze. At home, I went over my life piece by piece, analyzing every moment, every decision. Allison called occasionally, but I dropped her calls. What could I say to her? "I know my father is passing on to you the business I've invested my energy and money in." I needed to gather my thoughts before confronting them all. On the 7th day, I woke up with a clear head and a firm resolve. It was time to hear the truth from them in person. I dialed my mother's number. "Carrie? Oh my God, we were so worried." Her voice sounded both concerned and annoyed. "What's going on? Why did you disappear? I need to talk to you, all of you." My voice sounded calmer than I'd expected. "I'll be there for dinner tonight." "Of course, darling. I'll make your favorite chicken pot pie." Mom immediately went into her usual hostess mode, as if nothing had happened. "No need, Mom. This isn't a holiday visit." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Tonight, everything would change for good. My parents' house greeted me with the familiar smell of my mother's flowers and the faint melody of the classical music my father always played after work. Nothing seemed to have changed, but inside me, everything was different. "Carrie!" Mom opened the door, trying to hug me. I politely but firmly pulled away. "Where are Dad and Allison?" "In the living room." "Allison came as soon as she heard you were coming." We were all worried. I walked into the living room, where Dad was sitting in his favorite chair, and Allison was pacing the room nervously. "Finally!" Allison exclaimed, rushing over to me. "What's wrong? Why haven't you been answering your cell phone? We thought something had happened to you." Something did happen to me. I looked straight at my father. "I found out the truth." My father frowned, looking at me incomprehensibly. "What are you talking about, Carrie?" "About me being outed, Dad." The words sounded bitter but liberating. "I heard you and Allison talking in your office, the day you were born." A heavy silence hung in the room. Dad's face petrified, Mom's pale, and Allison looked like she'd been punched. "Were you eavesdropping?" Dad finally said, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. No apology, no explanation, just an accusation. "No, Dad. I overheard you saying that I don't deserve a dime of the business I've invested years of my life and nearly $50,000 of my own money in." "Carrie, dear," Mom intervened, "you've got it wrong. Your father just—" "No, Mom." I raised my hand, stopping her. "No more excuses. I want to know the truth. The whole truth." Dad rose slowly from his chair. He was still an imposing figure in his 62 years, tall, with a straight back and a piercing gaze. "All right, Carrie. You want the truth? Here it is. You were never cut out for business. Always too soft, too sentimental. I gave you a chance, let you work in the stores, but you just confirmed my fears." "What fears?" My voice was shaking with restrained emotion. You don't know how to make hard decisions, my father said, with the cold confidence of a man who was stating the facts. Remember that incident with the vendor who cheated us? Allison immediately offered to cancel the contract, and you insisted on negotiating. We lost almost $20,000 because of your softness. Dad? Allison looked shocked. That's not fair. No, let her talk. I looked straight into my father's eyes. What else, Dad? What other reasons did you have for crossing out your oldest daughter? You're too much like my mother, he said suddenly. Just as naive and idealistic. She took everyone's word for it too, and my father went bankrupt because of it. I swore my business would never suffer from sentimentality. I stood stunned by this revelation. My father never talked about his parents. So it's all about your own fears? I asked quietly. Were you afraid I'd destroy what you'd built? I knew you would, he cut me off. Allison is different. She has grip, an understanding of the business. She can be tough when she needs to be. What about my money? I got to the real question. The 45 grand I'd invested in renovating the North Branch? Dad looked away, and that was more eloquent than any words. Dad used it for the down payment on the new place in Green Hills. Allison said abruptly. The one in my name. Allison! Dad exclaimed. No, Dad. Allison suddenly stood beside me. It's not right. Carrie deserves to know the truth. I felt my insides grow cold. My own money was being used to expand a business I would never get. And you knew about this? I asked my sister. Allison shook her head, but her eyes betrayed the truth. Not right away, she admitted. I found out a few months ago when we signed the papers. Yeah. I wanted to tell you, but Dad convinced me it was best for everyone. Best for everyone? I couldn't believe my ears. How could cheating be better for everyone? It's not cheating, Mom intervened. It's just wise allocation of resources. Allison is better suited to running a business, and you, Carrie, have always been a home girl. You need a family, kids. Don't tell me what I need, Mom. My voice was ringing with tension. All my life you've been deciding for me, manipulating me. Family comes first, Carrie. We're in a tough spot right now, Carrie. You're needed here, Carrie. And in reality, you just used me when it was convenient. That's not true. Mom was outraged. We love you. Love you? I grinned bitterly. Is this what love looks like in our family? Lying, manipulating, stealing? No one stole anything from you. My father began to lose patience. You're the one who offered to invest in the business. Our business, Dad. A business that you promised Allison and I would own one day. I never promised that, Dad said firmly. You made up what you wanted to hear. I looked at him in disbelief, then shifted my gaze to Mom and Allison. Do you all approve of this? Do you really think it's the right thing to do? Mom looked away, and Allison suddenly exploded. What do you want from us, Carrie? Applause for your eternal martyrdom? You've always been a saint, giving up New York, sacrificing yourself for your family. But nobody asked you to do that. You chose this role, and now you're accusing us of accepting it. Her words hurt more than I expected. Not from my father, who was always cold and calculating, but from the sister I had loved and protected all my life. So you think so too, I said quietly. That I was just playing the part of a martyr? Weren't you? Allison didn't back down. You've always been the good daughter, the caring sister, always putting yourself morally above us. Poor Carrie, always sacrificing herself for an ungrateful family. It's a comfortable position, you know. Allison, stop it. Mom tried to stop her, but it was too late. No, let her speak, I said, my voice suddenly calm. Let everyone finally tell the truth. I turned to my father. You never believed in me, used my loyalty, my money, my time, and always knew you'd cross me off at the end. Then to Mom. And you let it happen. Smiling and nodding and pretending everything was fine, just so you wouldn't disturb your perfect world. And finally, to Allison. And you knew what was going on, and you kept quiet. You took every advantage you could get at my expense, and you didn't even think to object. There was a heavy silence in the room. Each of them looked affected in their own way. the father frowning, the mother nervously fiddling with the hem of her blouse, Allison standing with her head down. "What are you going to do now?" Father finally asked. "Sue us?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of his question. "No, Dad. I'm not going to sue you. I'm just leaving." "You're leaving?" Mom was perplexed. "Where?" "Out of your life, Mom. I'm taking my things that are still here and I'm leaving. Forever." "Don't be so dramatic, Carrie." Dad shook his head. "You've always had a penchant for melodrama. You'll sleep over, cool off, and everything will be back to normal." "No, Dad. Nothing will ever be the same again." I headed for the stairs leading to my old room. "I'll take my things and disappear from your life." Just like you wanted, cross myself off. As I walked up the stairs, I heard my mom start to cry, and my dad say something harshly to Allison. But the sounds didn't hurt anymore. It was like I was watching a scene from someone else's life, a drama that no longer concerned me. In my room, I pulled out an old suitcase and began packing up the few valuable things left here: photo albums, a few books, jewelry given by my grandmother. It only took me 15 minutes to pack away the tangible traces of 32 years of life. When I came downstairs with my suitcase, Allison was waiting for me in the hallway. Alone. "My parents are in the kitchen," she said quietly. "My mom's crying, my dad's angry. The usual." I nodded silently, heading for the door. "Carrie, wait." Allison touched my arm. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I really didn't." "But I didn't do anything to stop it," I said without anger, just stating the fact. "I'll give you the money back," she said suddenly. "The 45,000. I can take out a loan." "Keep it." I shook my head. "Consider it my last gift to you. Or a freedom payment, whatever you prefer." I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch without looking back. The evening sun was coloring the familiar street with golden hues, but it was a whole new world for me, a world without obligations to a family that had never really appreciated me. I reached my car and put my suitcase in the trunk. As I got behind the wheel, I saw my mother's face appear in the window. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't make out. Was it remorse? Anger? Misunderstanding? It didn't matter anymore. As I started the engine, I felt a strange calmness. The bridges were burned, but the road ahead was unknown, frightening, but my own. And I was ready to take it. Portland greeted me with torrential rain. Typical, I thought, looking out the windshield at the blurry lights of an unfamiliar city. Perfect weather for a new life. Wet, gray, and uncertain. I'd found an apartment before I arrived, a small studio in an old brick building on the east side of town. Nothing special: worn parquet, high ceilings, a window overlooking a quiet street with maple trees. But most importantly, there were no memories here. The first month passed like a blur. I hardly left the apartment, except for the necessary grocery shopping. My phone stayed off. I wasn't ready for the calls from my family, which never came. Nights I stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying the last conversation I'd had with my parents and sister in my head, trying to figure out how things could have gotten this far. "She's crossed out." Those words haunted me, even in my dreams. One morning, looking at my drained face in the bathroom mirror, I realized I couldn't go on like this. I hadn't come to Portland to slowly fade away within four walls. It was time for a change. That same day, I updated my resume and began my job search. My specialty, social work with teens, proved to be in demand, and a week later, I received an invitation to interview at the East Portland Youth Support Center. The center was located in a converted industrial building. Brick walls, large windows, and bright graffiti created by the teens themselves. Inside, it was noisy and lively. Teens playing table tennis, sitting in groups on worn couches, some studying with tutors. "You must be Carrie Whitmore." A tall black woman with short dreadlocks dyed purple approached me. "I'm Tasha Ramos, the assistant principal." We spoke on the phone. Tasha led me through the main hall to a small office where she told me about the center's work. They offered support for troubled teens, from academic assistance to psychological counseling to career guidance. We need another counselor, especially to work with the girls, Tasha explained. Many of them have difficult relationships with their families and find it hard to trust adults. I shuddered as I recognized myself in that description. Maybe that's why, at the end of the interview, Tasha said, "You know, Carrie, you have something special, some kind of understanding. I think you'd be perfect for this job." 2 days later, I got the job offer, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. My life began to take on a structure. I went to work in the mornings, where I did individual counseling and group sessions with teens. In the evenings, I returned to my quiet apartment, where no one was waiting for me. Weekends were spent alone. I explored the city, sat in a cafe with a book, or simply walked through the many parks of Portland. It was during one of these walks that I met Marge, an older woman walking her corgi on a leash. We bumped into each other at a park bench near my house. "Excuse me," I stepped back, letting her pass. "What an adorable dog you have." "This is Chester," the woman smiled. "And he absolutely agrees with your assessment. Doesn't he, honey?" The dog barked happily, and I couldn't help but smile, the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. "You're new here, aren't you?" the woman asked, taking a seat on the bench. "I saw you drive into the Peterson house. I live across the street." That's how I met Marjorie Klein, a 72-year-old widow, a former literature teacher, and, as it turned out, my neighbor. She invited me to tea, and I unexpectedly accepted. Marge's apartment was the opposite of mine, cozy, filled with books, photographs, and souvenirs from her travels. While she made tea, I looked at the pictures on the walls. Young Marge and her husband, Marge and her children and grandchildren, Marge in the mountains, on the beach, in some exotic country. "You've traveled a lot," I remarked, when she returned with a tray. After Jack died, she nodded. "My husband always put off traveling until later. 'When we retire, Marge,' he used to say. But he didn't live to retire. A heart attack at 59. So I decided I wasn't going to wait. Life's too short for later." Her words hit something deep inside me. How many times had I put my dreams on hold for the sake of my family, for an uncertain later? From that day on, Marge and I began to see each other regularly, on walks with Chester, over a cup of tea, sometimes going to the local farmers market together on Saturdays. She never asked about my past, for which I was grateful, but she was eager to share stories from her life, both ordinary and amazing. At work, Tasha became my closest friend. Energetic, straightforward, with a sharp mind and boundless dedication, she gradually turned from a colleague into a friend. It was Tasha who noticed how I tensed up every time we talked about family. "You know," she said one day when we stayed late after work, going through paperwork, "we all have our scars. You don't have to talk about them, but you can't pretend they don't exist." That night was the first time I told someone what had happened. Not everything, just the basics. The betrayal of my father, the painful separation from my family, the sense of loss that still lingered. Tasha listened without interrupting, then simply said, "You need help, Carrie. Professional help." She gave me the contacts for Liana, a therapist who specializes in family trauma. I resisted for 2 weeks before dialing the number. Liana turned out to be a calm, middle-aged woman with attentive eyes and a soft voice. Our first sessions were painful. I resisted, got angry, sometimes cried. But gradually, I began to understand the roots of my codependency, to realize the unhealthy patterns of relationships that had been formed in childhood. "You're not responsible for other people's feelings, Carrie," Liana said. "Not for your father's disappointment, not for your mother's anxiety, not for your sister's success. Your life belongs to you alone." Simple words that were so hard to accept. In parallel with therapy, I delved deeper and deeper into my work with adolescents. I was particularly drawn to the story of 15-year-old Dakota, an angular girl with perpetually slumped shoulders and a distrustful gaze. She grew up with a single mom who worked 2 jobs and was rarely home. Her father appeared in her life sporadically, always with grandiose promises that he never kept. "Why should I try?" she asked during one of our meetings. "No one cares anyway." I recognized myself in her. That girl who was always trying to earn the love and acceptance that was supposed to be unconditional. Not for them, Dakota, I said quietly. You're doing this for you. Because you deserve better. I saw my words hit her. A flicker of surprise in her eyes, then doubt, and finally a tiny spark of hope. In those days, I began to realize that I could use my experiences to help others. My scars, my pain. They weren't meaningless if they could help someone like Dakota not repeat my mistakes. Working with Dakota was not easy. She resisted, tested boundaries, sometimes snapped. But I saw great potential in her and didn't give up. We worked on her self-esteem, learned to set healthy boundaries, and looked for her strengths and interests. I never thought anyone really cared how I felt, she confided one day, as we sat in a coffee shop after Dakota's successful performance in a school poetry contest. I am interested, I replied sincerely. And you know what's even more important? You should be interested. In that moment, I realized that I was not only talking to her, but to myself, that little girl inside who was still waiting for her father's approval, who believed that her worth was determined by others. Months went by. Gradually, my life in Portland took shape. Not perfect, but real. I had a circle of acquaintances, favorite places, new habits. I no longer woke up feeling empty or like a ghost in a strange city. You've changed, Marge remarked one evening as we sat on her porch, watching the sunset. When you first arrived, you had such pain in your eyes. Now you're whole. I pondered her words. Had I really become whole? The wound of my family's betrayal still hurt, but it wasn't bleeding anymore. I was learning to live with that pain and not let it define me. Maybe not whole, I answered, but definitely not broken anymore. Marge nodded understandingly. You know, in Japan, there's an art called kintsugi, where broken pottery is glued together with gold. The cracks are not hidden, but rather emphasized, because they are what make an object unique. In October, when I had been working at the center for more than half a year, Tasha offered me to lead a new program for teenage girls, dedicated to the development of self-confidence and leadership skills. You're perfect for this, Carrie, she said. You get through to them in a way that none of us do. I agreed, though inside I still doubted my abilities. Would someone with such deep wounds be able to teach others confidence? Wouldn't it be hypocritical? But Liana, in another session, gently refuted my doubts. It's because you've been through this that your words carry weight, Carrie. You're not theorizing, you know. The group met twice a week. Dakota was one of the first members, and to my surprise, became an informal leader, helping the other girls open up. Seeing her transformation was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. One day after class, I noticed a man waiting in the lobby. Tall, with tired eyes and a slight smile, he shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, clearly feeling out of his element among the rowdy teenagers. You must be Carrie Whitmore, he said as I approached. I'm Nolan Riley, Zoe's father. Zoe was new to our group, a quiet girl who hardly participated in the discussions. Yes, that's me. I held out my hand. It's nice to meet you. You too. His handshake was firm and warm. Zoya said, for the first time in a long time, that she liked it in some, well, official place. I wanted to thank you in person. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of weariness, hope, and genuine gratitude, that made me feel an unexpected warmth inside. Zoya's a wonderful girl, I said. She just needs time to open up. We talked for almost an hour about Zoya, about the program, about the challenges of raising a teenager alone. It turned out Nolan's wife had died 3 years ago of cancer, leaving him with a 10-year-old daughter. He worked as an editor at a small publishing house, specializing in popular science fiction, and struggled to be a good father. Sometimes I feel like I'm completely failing, he admitted, especially now that she's a teenager. I don't know what she's thinking, what she wants. Believe me, she doesn't know it herself, I smiled. That's normal. When we were saying goodbye, Nolan asked uncertainly, maybe we could have coffee sometime? Not just to talk about Zoe, but to just talk? I felt myself blushing like a teenager. I'd been so focused on rebuilding myself for so long that I'd almost forgotten what it was to like someone, to be interested in someone. I think that would be good, I replied, and I saw his face light up with a smile. As I drove home that night, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward instead of backward. My ruins were slowly turning into a foundation, not perfect, with cracks and bumps, but strong enough to start building something new. A year and a half in Portland had changed me. Outwardly, I was still the same Carrie Whitmore, but inside I was a different person. My program for teenage girls had received a grant and expanded into new neighborhoods. Nolan and I had been dating for almost a year, creating a relationship built on respect. That February morning, I woke up in Nolan's apartment. Snow was falling outside the window, and Zoe was making French toast, our Sunday ritual. My phone vibrated a number with my hometown area code. Carrie? My sister's voice sounded strained. Can you talk? What's wrong, Allison? It's Dad. He's had a massive heart attack. He's in the hospital, critical condition. The world has frozen. The image of his father, strong and powerful, didn't fit with the word critical. The doctors say we should prepare for the worst, Allison continued. Mom's hysterical. I know you have no reason to come, but he's been asking about you, Carrie. In a year and a half, I've learned to live without them, not to flinch at the words she's crossed off. I'll come, I said, not for him. For me. Nolan had offered to come with me, but it was a journey I had to make on my own. Allison met me at the airport. She looked exhausted, pale face, circles under her eyes. We hugged, discreetly, but without hostility. Thank you for coming, she said. I wasn't sure you'd agree. My mother was sitting in the hospital corridor, hunched over in a plastic chair. When she saw me, she shuddered and stood up, aged, with a faded look in her eyes. Carrie, she whispered, you've arrived. I let her hug me, but I felt no pain or joy, just a quiet acceptance of the moment. My father lay among the tubes and wires, gaunt, wearing an oxygen mask. Carrie, his voice was barely audible. You're here. Yes, Dad. I'm here. I didn't think I'd see you again, after what I did. I didn't say a word. In a year and a half, I'd imagined this moment hundreds of times. Angry accusations, tears, dramatic reconciliations. But now I felt only quiet compassion. I was wrong, my father continued. You deserved better. Yes, I do, I agreed without bitterness. But it doesn't matter anymore. I had found my way. In the hallway, my mom grabbed my hand. Please don't leave right away. I'm so sorry for you. I should have stood up for you, but I always went with the flow. I'll stay until I know what's wrong with Dad. But not for the past, but to move on. The next few days were spent waiting in the hospital. Dad's condition had stabilized, but he had a long recovery ahead of him. In the hospital cafeteria, Allison finally decided to have a frank conversation. I have a confession to make, she began. The business isn't as successful as it seemed. We've been teetering on the brink of bankruptcy for the last year. But Dad always said things were going great. Dad's not the type to admit problems, especially when he was so insistent that he could do it without you. She told me how Dad made risky decisions, refused advice from consultants. I realize now what you've contributed all these years, Allison said quietly. You've been the voice of reason that we both miss. I listened with detachment. A year and a half ago, this news would have broken my heart. Now I was just accepting them as fact. I'm sorry you're having problems, I said sincerely. But it's none of my business anymore. I know it is. I just wanted you to know that you were right. The next day, my father was strong enough to talk. I was a fool, Carrie. He looked up at the ceiling. All my life, I've prided myself on my business acumen. Turns out, without you, I've lost everything. You haven't lost everything, Dad. You have Allison, you have Mom, you have your health. All you lost was me, and that was your choice. I realize it's too late to fix things. His voice trembled. But I want you to know that I'm proud of who you've become. In spite of me. I felt a lump come up in my throat. How many years had I dreamed of hearing those words? Thank you, I said. It means a lot to me to hear it, but I don't need your approval anymore. I've learned to appreciate myself. When it was clear that my father was out of danger, Allison and I talked about the future. Honestly, I don't know what to do, she admitted. I never wanted to go into this business. I just couldn't disappoint my dad. What do you really want, Allison? If you didn't have Dad's expectations? She hesitated. I always wanted to open a small cafe. Just a cozy place with good coffee. Maybe now would be a good time? Sell the stores and start something you really love. What will Dad say? Who cares? It's your life, Allison, not his. Before I left, I stopped by to say goodbye to my dad. We talked about minor things, but there was a new understanding between us. Not intimacy, but respect for boundaries. Will you be coming back? He asked. I might. Not for the past, but to see what we all become in the future. Mother cried when I left, but there was no manipulation in her tears. I missed out on so much, she said. So late to realize that being a good wife doesn't mean being a bad mother. It's never too late to start over, Mom, for all of us. At the airport, Allison gave me a big hug. Thank you for coming, and for showing me that it's possible to live a different life. We both deserve better. Let me know when you decide to go to the cafe. Coming back to Portland was like a breath of fresh air. Nolan and Zoya greeted me with a Welcome Home Carrie banner. There was a surprise waiting for me at home. They had converted a small room into an office for my new project. Tasha said the center will support your women's program. Nolan said, we thought you might need a place to work. Over the next few months, I dove headfirst into creating a support program for women survivors of emotional abuse. My experience, my pain, my journey to healing, all became the foundation for helping others. We called the program Your Truth. You have to find your truth, your voice, your power. Allison sold the family business and opened a cafe. We called occasionally, building a new relationship based on respect. My father was recovering, and my mother, to my surprise, enrolled in ceramics classes. Dozens of women with different stories gathered on the opening day of Her Truth. Each of us comes here with our own pain, I began. But the most important thing is not what happened to us, but what we decide to do next. Sometimes you have to lose a family in blood to find a true family in spirit, and to find yourself. I was no longer the erased daughter. I was Carrie Whitmore, a woman who had found her truth and her power.
Любі глядачі, дякую вам за перегляд, ставте лайки та підписуйтесь на канал. Також напишіть в коментарях, чи погоджуєтесь ви з Дженніфер, чи вона мала розказати все матері, чи ні, чи мала все розказати своєму коханцю щодо свого чоловіка, чи ні. І також прокоментуйте, чи вам сподобалось це відео.